What does Five Nights at Freddy's Secret of the Mimic hide in the recycling center? We're in the thick of it at this point, with Arnold having seen some pretty crazy stuff. Our goal is now to try to escape this recycling center of nightmares. In this video, we'll be taking a look at how this place works behind the scenes and what secrets we can find out of bounds. We'll of course be breaking things along the way too, like how many nurses are hiding behind these walls, and what happens if you jump in the water or lava. We have a lot to cover and sequence break, so I hope you enjoyed this broken adventure of Secret of the Mimic. When you're pulling 36-hour shifts and need to sleep in your van, getting some shut-eye is probably rough, especially if you can't block out the daylight. I'm a night owl myself, so I'm often sleeping during the day, but I need darkness to sleep. So thankfully, Mantis Sleep, the sponsor of this video, is here to help me out. With the Mantis Sleep mask, I can bring comfortable darkness wherever I go. No more light shining through windows or those terrifying mimic eyes in the dark.
Gregory.
The soft plush mask is easily adjustable so you can fit it snugly against your face, but spacious enough inside so you don't feel like something's touching your eyes. And that's important to me, because I'm meticulous, man. I actually tried out their sleep mask sound version, which lets you utilize Bluetooth to control what you hear while you rest, which is a pretty nice combo. I feel like this is going to be a lifesaver for me on overnight flights. It's great. So if you're a late night worker who needs to sleep during the day, or just someone who likes to control their sleep environment, give Mantis Sleep a try. So click my link in the description below and use my code on screen now to get 10% off your next order. And a big thanks to Mantis Sleep for supporting my much needed sleep as a creator. Alrighty, onward to the recycling center. So we had just got done dealing with these pirates who we had taught a valuable lesson. At least that's what the achievement says. Coming to, this nurse bot comes rolling up as it runs a whole diagnostic on the suit we're in. It thinks Arnold, our character, is a foreign object, and explains how it's basically going to destroy us in order to fix the suit. Luckily, it leaves on the track it's fixed to, allowing us to sneak on out. Pushing on, we'll hear a voice speaking through an intercom explaining how we're in a recycling center. We'll even be introduced to the nurse that had just tended to our suit, being Nurse Dollie. Following this, we find ourselves in this area with Dolly as she skirts about on the track. Using this computer, we'll need to open up a vent across the room as it has a cog inside that helps us fix a door that we'll need to open. We'll get a mail call jump scare after grabbing the gear, but once putting this little gear in the door, we can go back to the computer we were at before and open the door to progress. Let's go back though and take another look at everything we just went through now. When we have the pleasure of meeting Nurse Dolly for the first time, you'll see that she appears right in front of us as our screen is temporarily blurred, creating the effect that we're regaining consciousness. I'll tell you what, she had Arnold dead to rights at this moment, as he's temporarily trapped in the suit. I'm sure you've noticed at this point that we can see his arms helplessly floating within the suit, as Nurse Dolly goes on her fairly long rant. Concluding her meet and greet with us, she'll quickly jerk on the track she's fixed to as she leaves our view. Slowing this down, we can watch her as she makes her exit. She zips down this track and makes her way through this door here, where she eventually ends up unloading. Getting out of the suit, we can observe how it opens up from this angle as the headpiece pulls back, with a chest opening up, which we see of course when normally getting out of it. Once free though, I basically followed Dolly in the same way, as I too clipped through the door. We'll see that if we explore this area without opening the door, Nurse Dolly is nowhere to be found within here. I accidentally hit a save point while I was up here too, but this followed with me trying to take Arnold for a dip in this lovely body of water. Joke's on me though, because, well, the water appears to be made of glass, as our character will walk on it. You normally can't fall off into the water, but treating it like a walkable floor is not what I expected. However, I guess you could say I went into the water eventually, as I got pushed through it while trying to crouch. Unglorious. Reluctantly, we have to let the game progress to push on though, leading us to officially meeting Nurse Dolly once again. When she's told to get back to work, we can see her zip off as she makes her way to this corner, where she'll temporarily sit, as she'll then start patrolling this area like she normally does. Going completely out of bounds here, we can find a couple of lights that are floating out here, along with a pallet too. We can also find another Nurse Dolly floating a little ways out from the map, as she stands out here in a T-pose. I ended up messing around with her model, which resulted with having this gigantic monstrous nurse, who could end all of us with one swift kick. Coming back to where we are though, we can take a closer look at this Nurse Dolly's death animation. She basically runs over us if we're caught on the track, and will then sort of just linger as she shakes all about. I let the game keep running at this point though, and noticed that the electricity we normally see coming out of the track by our feet was still making its rounds. Appearing invisible, I waited for a few moments to see if she'd reappear, but she never did. Not much of the recycling center is loaded at this point, but once grabbing the gear we need, we can see that it'll immediately load in the next area, along with the Mimic Nurse, who we haven't encountered yet. This part made me pause for a second with how we find Dolly's feet just sitting here after all of this. It's fair to speculate that perhaps the Mimic grabbed Dolly while we weren't looking, tearing her from the mount so it could wear her skin. How classy. It would explain the leftover feet that we're seeing here, along with the fact that we can see the Mimic is lacking the shoes while in the Dolly suit. But I digress. Let's carry on as we normally would. So when we make our way through the door, we'll see the Mimic with its Dolly suit on. Basically, at this point, we need to sneak around as the Mimic patrols the area. We have to go down here and... Nope, wait. I'm dead. Oh, were we just granted mercy? Anyway, getting past the Mimic, we'll go ahead and rev this up, which in turn powers on the fan within this vent. Going through these vents, we'll make our way out of this area, where we'll want to access the doll hospital again. We need to explore the entirety of this area for scraps that have been compressed to cubes. I believe there are 6 of them we need to collect, along with an admin upgrade station where we can essentially level up. Once we've disposed of the cubes of trash into the chutes, we'll approach this console that's indicating the chutes are full. Hitting the button will grant us access through this maintenance door, which leads us down to this conveyor belt. The Mimic will then crash to the floor above us at this point, where we're now tasked with releasing these cubes of trash onto the conveyor belt. They will stun the Mimic, and if we consistently release these, we can knock the Mimic back to the end of this conveyor belt, where Terminator 2 fate awaits it. Or so I thought. Let's rewind back though, and take another look at all of this. Starting off, I went ahead and let this imposter nurse take me out, to see if we get anything different with the death animation. Unfortunately, it's not much different from the actual Nurse Dollie's death animation, as you can see. Loading up again, I went to explore the outer bounds here with nothing new taking place, but did notice that these 2 particular chains in this one room were freaking out. They were just flailing about randomly, and I honestly wasn't entirely sure why this was happening. I've seen this elsewhere too in the game. I couldn't help myself and decided to pull my Ant-Man suit out as I attempted to survive the Mimic. Sadly, no matter what Arnold's size is, his soul belongs to the Mimic if he's caught. Like I said before though, not much is occurring out of bounds at this point, but we can see that some assets were left over from the previous section, like our suit that we had just recently climbed out of. Coming back, I noticed that once we're in this area and the Mimic conveniently walks in, there's a reason for it. It's because as we walk through here, the Mimic is loaded in right at the door, as it makes an immediate entry to where we are. Something else we can see while traversing about takes place in the vents. We can see how this big section will load in below the room we're heading towards. It is an area we haven't reached yet, so let's not stray too far off the path, as we'll get here eventually. However, this lava here had me wondering, what happens if we Terminator 2 ourselves like the other Arnold, possibly saluting the Mimic with a different gesture with one finger? So I deleted the rail and jumped in. Slightly unsurprising, but as you can see, there is no collision, resulting with us falling into the great beyond. Glorious! During another instance, I just went ahead and deleted the Mimic. It didn't actually affect the game really, minus the looming threat, and I was able to mosey on as usual. This actually led me to wondering what would happen if we backtracked to where we came from, where the real Nurse Dollie was. So after deleting this door, as you can see, we're able to make the area load back in, with the other unloading, and vice versa. It's pretty trippy to go back and forth with loading the areas in. Coming over here though, I noticed something that I hadn't before. This section here that I'm teleporting to is where we hit a save point that ends up being where we conclude a big chase with a Mimic. This would be one heck of a shortcut for speedrunners if they were able to figure out how to get over here, as it's just behind this wall. But I guess the 90% run is already like 3 minutes. Coming back to where we are though, I had to restart, since my sequence of events were screwed up by the save point we hit. While I was recollecting the trash cubes though, I had an encounter with a Mimic which resulted with it getting stuck. I don't know why this happened, as I was not using any mods at this point, but as you can see, it just walked up onto these trash bags and got stuck. Sucks to suck. Even with getting the maintenance door opened, we can see it's not having much luck. Did this end up happening for anyone else? Pressing on, we're at the part now where the Mimic ends up crashing through the floor above. If we come up above to watch this occur, you'll see it's sort of strange. Perhaps it may have been my tinkering with the speed of the game, but the Mimic will load in as it begins to float up and through the ceiling. It'll linger there for a second, but then get into a crouching position, as it begins to come back down where it ends up crashing through the floor to block us. I will say, it feels slightly more terrifying to watch in slow motion though. But I went ahead and started blasting this fool with trash again, only to find myself running out, as we're blocked from progressing now. I found this part to be curious, because I decided to try warping past the Mimic, which I thought would work. I ended up dying though, thinking that I perhaps didn't do it in time. Once the Mimic unloaded, I was able to see my character did in fact teleport past it. So it looks like we can't sequence break this part like that. Unglorious. However, we can get a closer look at how the Mimic endures its scorching fate here. Fighting to not fall in, the Mimic eventually loses the battle as it can't hang on any longer. We can see that it simply falls through and out of the map though, as its one leg hyperextends in a painful manner. This normally happens fast, as it does unload right as it falls through the lava. But let's move on now, shall we? So once we get rid of the Mimic, we'll want to proceed through this vent, which leads to the vent system we had used before. Continuing to use the vent will lead back to this room again, where we'll now have access to opening the power reactor door. We then hop on an elevator to go deeper. Following this catwalk, we'll once again have another elevator that we're going to take down. However, during this elevator ride, we'll see that the Mimic is in fact still with us, as it begins clawing its way out of this wall, escaping its hot, steamy bath. This caught me off guard my first time playing, as I wasn't expecting the Mimic to react so quickly once the elevator door opened. Rest in peace. So we run as soon as this opens, and we make our way to this cluttered walkway, which leads us onto the conveyor belt. As we move on, we'll see the Mimic emerge from a wall in the distance, as we now need to run to this vent before it reaches it. Creeping forward, we'll eventually find ourselves back in a patrolling situation, as we now need to stalk and avoid the Mimic. We eventually go to this elevator, which alerts our bot friend as we open it. This follows with us taking the elevator up as it eventually breaks down. We're tasked with fixing it, which doesn't take too long, but when we get going again, the Mimic pulls a fast one as it drops down from above on top of the elevator. It'll begin striking the elevator, as we need to fix this dang thing again, but with a time limit now. Successfully doing this results with the elevator accelerating at a high speed, as it will eventually reach the top and crush the Mimic. We then exit the death cage to safety. Let's go back one last time though, and take an overall look at everything we just experienced from a different perspective. So zooming out right after the Mimic falls into the lava, we can see down below how some portions of the next section have loaded in. This includes the conveyor belts we end up running along, as this one carries barrels to a big iron bucket. There's also some chains floating about, with models out here as well, which we'll take a closer look at in a few moments. Coming back to where we are though, I got up on this particular elevator, which led me to being able to jump out of bounds and down to the ground level of this room, which ended up not really having anything worth investigating. However, we can take a closer look at the Mimic when it makes its daring escape from the lava pit it had fallen into. We can find the model within here in a T-pose, where it will then move about in a strange manner, right before it begins to claw through the wall. The lava is intense looking in this view, and it was cool to get a close-up look at this mechanized marvel while all this took place. Something else I noticed involved the lava and where it's going. We can see it goes through the catwalk and the ground level of the building. It loses its molten look as it turns almost gray as it falls into the abyss. Of course, the Mimic's death animation for us is basically the same, minus its appearance, but I pulled a fast one on this sucker as I managed to warp behind it during this scene. I thought for sure it was going to do a quick 180 and rock me, but as you can see, it took off on its normal route. This was nice, because this allowed me to watch our molten friend run this path without worrying about getting destroyed. Molten Dolly will burst through these pallets and boxes though, as it melts into the wall here. The Mimic will eventually come to a stop within here and freeze in a T-pose position, along with an identical model in here as well. Coming back to our character, I walked this path carefree, since the Mimic had already ran through it. But the joke's on me though, because once I get close enough to where we get on the conveyor belt, I suddenly died. Unglorious. Moving the camera at this point allowed the game to keep running during this, which began to give me lag. That's when I realized that all the barrels and boxes that were on the conveyor belts weren't unloading when they were dropped into the lava bucket. They were just piling up within the bucket. I would have messed with this further, but I've already had the game crash on me so many times as it is, so I carried on. Coming up to the next encounter with the Mimic, I for sure thought that this model here was going to be the one used for this scene. If we look within though, you'll see that this isn't the case, as another Mimic has been loaded in for this part. We can see it assume its position as it prepares to break through the wall. Well, rather before it clips through the wall, as the structure remains the same, which makes sense, seeing as the player would normally never be able to see this up close. Once it chases us into the vent here, we'll see how this model will linger outside until we push on. Nothing worth noting happens throughout this area, which leads us to the final elevator as we're chased into it by the Mimic. Just like the vent we escaped through a few moments ago, the Mimic will linger here as well, and even continue to do so as the map unloads. You'll notice that the room we eventually escape to from the elevator is actually not as high up as you'd think, given how long the elevator appears to climb while playing normally. The elevator shaft is incredibly long, and is essentially the only thing moving to create the illusion that we, the player, are going up in this elevator. This brings me to this thing though. There are multiples of them scattered throughout this section we just went through, but I'm not entirely sure what their purpose is. If I had to speculate, it looks like a burning cutout of Nurse Dollie making a pose, like when a cartoon character bursts through a wall. Perhaps it has something to do with how the molten mimic spawns in. As I noticed, it does spawn just parallel to the cutout when dropping down on the elevator. I'm just not certain. Definitely food for thought though. Like I said, the mimic will just appear when dropping down on top of us, making it the 4th molten mimic we've technically encountered. I tried being a sneaky sneak here though, and warped my way out of the elevator while the mimic was on it. This gave me the save point here, but once I let it play out, you can see the mimic still manages to destroy me. Rude. This led to a funny incident as I reloaded the game. Coming back, you can see I got the save, but looking in the elevator, we can see the mimic is definitely active, as it continues to strike the elevator continuously. I'd say it's just mad, but it ain't got no feelings. Or does it? In the normal sequence of events though, we can see as we're approaching the top of this elevator shaft that the mimic makes an escape here. It happens fast, as I imagine a lot of players miss this. This is slowed down of course, but we can see it crawling out in a creepy manner right before launching off the elevator. It goes to the wall here as it makes this magnificent dive to safety, disappearing right when the elevator comes to a stop. But with that, that's everything I can find hidden in the recycling center with Nurse Dollie. I do hope you enjoyed this endeavor, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video, as we'll be tackling the next section very soon. Cheers!